What is up, everybody? RandomRandomMan here, after I hopefully fixed the audio issue that was in my last review. I am here to review the highly anticipated movie sequel, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, which stars Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Jamie Foxx, Dane DeHaan, Paul Giamatti, and Sally Field, and is directed by Mark Webb. Now, the plot this time around centers on our main hero, Peter Parker, played by Andrew Garfield, having to deal with graduating from high school with his girlfriend Gwen Stacy, played by Emma Stone, and tackled the issue of being New York's friendly neighborhood Spider-Man as new villains Electro, played by Jamie Foxx, and Rhino, played by Paul Giamatti, become threats to the city. Meanwhile, Peter has to deal with all the secrets left by his father, played by Campbell Scott, from the first movie, while living with his Aunt May, played by Sally Field, and renewing an old relationship with his dying friend, Harry Osborn, played by Dane DeHaan. Right off the bat, this movie has a great cast and is set up to be the best comic book superhero movie ever, with all these new characters being involved in the story now, and the origin story being out of the way. Speaking of which, I actually reviewed the original Amazing Spider-Man in 2012, back when it was first released, while also giving my brief thoughts on Sam Raimi's trilogy, with a link to that review in the description. And to quickly sum up my thoughts on those movies, 2002 Spider-Man was a great start in helping develop the movie craze for superheroes that we all love. 2004's Spider-Man 2 is the best and my favorite Spider-Man movie ever. 2007 Spider-Man 3, while flawed and could have been a lot better, is still a decent film that wrapped up the trilogy nicely. And 2012's The Amazing Spider-Man was, while unnecessary, still a nice reimagining of the character. Seeing how I have enjoyed all the past Spider-Man movies, I was still excited to see how this follow-up would play out. How was it? Let's run down the whole thing. Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker and Emma Stone's Gwen Stacy are such perfect casting for these roles, as they play off of each other's characters nicely, like how they were originally portrayed on the page, with Garfield's wisecracking alter ego and Stone's attractive and lovable science whiz delivering laughs and satisfying expectations. Sally Field as Aunt May, in my eyes, is still the best portrayal of the character we have thus far, as not only does she act like how a normal parent would act towards their child when looking out for one's safety, but she is still loving towards Peter in the role as well. Peter's parents, played by Campbell Scott and Beth Davis, were also great for the screen time they were given, only shortly, as they were a part of setting up the backstory carried over from the first film. So far, everyone does a good job. But how are the villains? Jamie Foxx's Electro was fine in the role, and while he was given the most screen time out of all three villains, as both Max Dillon and the supercharged character, he started off very reminiscent of what I think and what other people think of as the Riddler, played by Jim Carrey from Batman Forever. As a crazy fan with an obsession with vigilantes, and as much as I enjoy Carrey's humor there, here it made me feel more sorry than Dylan than I should have, as I don't know if that was the initial intention to feel this way. Luckily, Fox got more intimidating as Electro as the film went on towards the final battle. Dane DeHaan as Harry Osborn was a nice choice, as he did great in the movie Chronicle prior to this and as another superhero movie, and here he does a serviceable job as he pulls off being a sympathetic ill character while also being a likable bastard as he grows a bigger motive for tearing New York City apart. Paul Giamatti as Rhino seemed to have fun being the character, but he did not have anything to do at all, and that brings up the biggest issues I have with the movie. The script seems to want to jam-pack everything they want to show on screen in a crammed mess that caused the pacing to be so inconsistent, and while it did bring some nice scenes between Peter and Gwen out, the more serious scenes with the villains seemed to pale in comparison. The movie even went out of its way to recreate the first movie's plot within the first 10 minutes, and while it was a welcome addition to further reveal the untold story that we never even got from the first movie, it was a sign for things to come. Not only that, but aside from the nice casting, the villains were wasted in what their roles were going to be in against Spider-Man. like Rhino being reduced to only cameos for the couple of minutes he was on screen in total, and Dahan not being the Green Goblin for only a lot of time. He was only in it very briefly. And this is one area where, along with the writing, I think this sinks lower than even Spider-Man 3 for all the faults that movie have. And before I get lashed out in the comments or whatever, hear me out. At least Harry was developed over 3 movies in Spider-Man 3. Sandman was being the central focus all along, and only Venom suffered the most severely, but mainly because he was shoehorned in at the end just to satisfy fans. And for comparison's sake, he had more screen time than Rhino did in this movie. The editing for this movie must have been a nightmare, and it must have been as difficult to cope with like in the first movie, as some scenes were cut out of that film, but there must have been a lot more scenes cut out here too, most notably Shailene Woodley's appearance as Mary Jane Watson, as she is supposed to have a bigger focus in the next film. Making the last couple of minutes of this movie should have been cut out. And a lot of scenes should have been cut out, frankly, as the running time for this movie was very close to a long 2.5 hours. That issue also brings up another problem of how the people behind this movie seem to be more concerned with setting up a cinematic universe that could rival Disney's own franchise, as it is so baffling that Sony is more excited for the sequels and spin-offs that are already set up for the franchise, like the Venom and Sinister Six movies, and we know they're coming, making this movie feel a lot like a prequel to the planned Sinister Six movie, just to get fans excited and seated in the theater to see what's going to happen. The many subplots also make the script even more crowded, ranging from a subplot with Aunt May dealing with being a nurse to another one of Harry dealing with the death of his father, Norman, played briefly by Chris Cooper. And Harry is also suffering from the same illness that Norman had. All of this seemed too much to follow, as the tone greatly suffered as well, making this movie more enjoyable to watch than the first one, but its tone shift greatly deviated from the setup from the first one, as that one was really dark, and that too also brings up yet another issue. Sony intended for this movie to be as separate and distinct from the other wall-calling franchise that is still embedded in people's minds while retaining the Spidey license, which is not helped by the fact that Spider-Man 2 came out 10 years ago and still holds immensely well as the best in either one of these series. And while Spidey's costume looks a lot better than in the first movie, this is still very similar to Raimi's costume. For what Sony tried to do to make this movie more lighthearted, like how a Spider-Man movie should be, they have gone back to square one, like the Raimi trilogy. And it seems like such a huge step backward for this franchise. On the flip side, however, Hans Zimmer's blazing score accompanies this film very well, and the action, like the other movies, is still spectacularly crafted, as Spidey's high-flying acrobatics, slow-motion sequences, and final battle are so much fun to watch. And I will go as far as to say that this entry has the best action ever in any Spider-Man movie, especially in 3D like how I saw it. Unfortunately, if you have seen the marketing for this movie, then you have seen the majority of the action showcased already, but you will still be satisfied of what is shown on screen, as it is, like I said before, so fun to watch. It may have sounded like I've bashed this movie to death for all the problems I had with it, but I am addressing these problems for my huge love for my favorite superhero movie. And I still think that this is a very good movie on its own, though I don't think it's my favorite, possibly. But what went down behind the scenes was still necessary to address of how this movie was stringed together up until the final cut. This is still a fun official start to the summer movie season, even if Captain America the Winter Soldier was a better unofficial start over a month ago, and I highly recommend seeing that movie if you haven't already. However, if you have already seen the second Cap movie, give this movie a go. My final thoughts on this movie are that while the script does cause issues tone and pacing-wise, the stellar performances from Garfield, Stone, Fields, and Dahan, along with the thrilling action, are enough to make me give this movie a firm recommendation that would have Spidey and comic book superhero fans like myself enjoying overall. My final verdict for The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is 3.5 out of 5 stars. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you later on the next movie review.